Brendan Howlin.
Taoiseach, well-established democracies around the world are struggling to deal with the issue of fake news. Part of the problem is that online political advertisements that are misleading or malicious can be purchased on social media platforms by third parties and targeted at specific audiences to maximise the damage that such misinformation can cause. In December of 2017, following consideration of Deputy James Lawless's online advertising and social media transparency bill, the Government established an interdepartmental group to consider the substantive issue of social media use by external, anonymous or hidden third parties. A report was published in July of 2018 which recognised the need to regulate political advertising. A public consultation closed in mid-October of last year. In December last year, the Government held an open policy forum on the regulation of online political advertising. And finally, on the 15th of November of this year, the Government published proposals to regulate the transparency of online political advertising. The full report has not yet been published, but the announcement is that a new law will be brought in to ensure elections held in this jurisdiction are free and fair, that respect freedom of expression and access to legitimate and truthful information. Online political ads will be clearly identified as such. That's what we were promised. Taoiseach, you previously said that you had mixed feelings about the decision of Twitter to ban political advertising in response to the problem of misinformation. And last year in a biography, it was claimed that you yourself floated the idea of creating an anonymous social media account to comment positively on news. Well, that might never have happened. You are undoubtedly well aware of the capacity of how social media can be gamed for political benefit. So what I want to know, Taoiseach, is whether the Government is serious about the announcement that online political advertising in this state will be regulated. You hold all the power in relation to whether this happens or not. You have the unique power of Taoiseach in being able to call a general election and fix the date of that. And you also are in charge of the Government's legislative programme. So, a very straightforward and simple question, Taoiseach. Will the Government and will you today commit to having legislation in place to regulate online political advertising so that this new law is fully in force in time for our next general election?
Taoiseach has 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I think when it comes to this area, what we're all striving to do is to balance the need and desirability for free speech and free expression and free association on the one hand, with making sure that we don't have fake news, that we don't have misinformation, whether it's online or in print, because misinformation and fake news is wrong no matter where it is, whether it's online or in print or on posters for that matter. And we see quite a lot of fake posters appearing around the country at the moment, largely targeted at the Government, but at others too. I don't believe in an outright ban on political advertising, whether that's banning posters or banning print advertising or banning it online. But I do think it needs to be properly regulated and made transparent so that we know the source of any political advertising and also who's paid for it and how it's being targeted. We set up an interdepartmental group exactly on that point, and the group identified that there is an obvious gap in the treatment of print, broadcast media and online platforms when it comes to political advertising, and that's something we need to change because it is easier online to spread disinformation because it is not properly regulated. So the current proposal is to regulate the transparency of online political advertising, and we are committed to legislate as soon as we possibly can to mitigate this gap. The regulation of political advertising in the broadcast media is part of a wider regulatory framework for advertising. Advertising in the print media is subject to a self-regulatory code of the Advertising Standards Authority of Ireland. However, political advertising isn't actually covered within the scope of this code. So it is the view that overhauling the regulatory provisions across all platforms is therefore a significant piece of work which will be best done by the Electoral Commission when it's established in conjunction with the Broadcasting Authority. But in the meantime, it is our priority to press ahead with legislation to ensure that online advertising is properly regulated and is transparent, and we'll progress that legislation as soon as we possibly can.
May I get 1 minute?
We've no commitment, Taoiseach, from you that it will be done in time for the next election. Is that your ambition, at least? Taoiseach, I'm genuinely concerned about the open use of racist, sexist and other bigoted language on social media by fringe political groups and movements. I actually had a conversation with somebody who was regulating this from one of the platforms, and he tells me that you would be actually shocked at what is going on. They appear to have become bolder in recent months, and I believe that there's a real fear that this toxic rhetoric will actually encourage violence against people. At the last local elections, I was pleased to see candidates from our new community standing for a multiplicity of parties and as independents. But the sad truth is, many of them faced relentless attack of a racist nature online. So do you agree that we need this legislation, and will you give a commitment now that the legislation will be enacted, or at least you will seek to have it enacted in time for the next general election?
Thank you. Taoiseach, 1 minute.
I do agree, Deputy, and we made a government decision to do exactly that on the 5th of November this year, to prepare legislation to require political advertising online to be transparent. However, our current estimates is that we'll have the general scheme for Q2 2020. Whether that's in advance of the election or not is undetermined, but that's as quickly as the Department believes it can draft that legislation. But we will do it as soon as we possibly can. Separate to that, the Minister for Justice has launched a public consultation on the whole issue of hate speech. We have legislation already, and that is Incitement to Hatred Act. But I think everyone acknowledges that that legislation is quite old, needs to be updated to reflect the modern times. So there are separate issues there. There's political advertising, which needs to be properly regulated, and there's the whole issue of hate speech. And the Minister for Justice is working on that in particular with a view to updating that legislation and making it much stronger.